Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. I'm Tim Hart Anderson, the Senior Minister here at Westminster and moderator of today's forum with Pooja Lakshmin. We have a special music opening for you today by world-renowned musician Pipa, is that how you pronounce it? With playing a Chinese cultural instrument, a Pipa, Gao Hong, thank you very much. Gao has performed all over the world in solo concerts, symphony orchestras, artists from many different musical genres. She has won a Sorrel Medallion in Recording, a Sally Award, 6 gold medals from the Global Music Awards, and numerous commissions from orchestras, chamber groups, and other organizations. He studied at Beijing's Central Conservatory, now teaches at Carleton College, did teach at McAllister College, we didn't get that in there. She also directs the Chinese Music Ensemble and is guest professor at the Central China and Tianjin Conservatories. Please join me in welcoming to the Westminster Town Hall Forum, Gao Hong.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a beautiful place and beautiful song and, of course, wonderful people here. And how many people see the Pipa live? Raise your hand. Yeah, great, but it's not many. So before I play, I always like to share a story. 1994, I came to America, did my first solo tour in New York City and Cleveland, Pittsburgh. When I went to Denver museum, they announced it on the public radio, said, please come to hear the Chinese woman play the pipa. 5 minutes later, somebody called in, how could this Chinese woman play the peapod? I wish I could play the vegetable. I would be so rich. But since then, I became a habit of, it doesn't matter where I go, even for the elementary school or to Orchard Hall, I always like to introduce what the pipa is. Before you hear it, they say, oh yeah, they look like a banjo, mandolin, or a lute, but actually it's none of the above. When you play guitar, you plug your fingers towards inside like this. That's how you play the guitar, but the Chinese people play opposite way. If you want to try, maybe a good way to try is flip out. Maybe on your hand or on your leg. You start index finger first, middle finger, ring finger, pinky, and thumb, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1. That's how you play the pipa. So the Chinese music always tell you stories. Sometimes I will imitate the sounds like a flowing water. Or sometimes you can hear bubbly water. Or sometimes you can hear Chinese gong, dai, dai, dai. Chinese simple cha, cha, cha. Chinese drum, dong, 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 together. Dai, 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 dai. Did you hear that? Or I can make a sound like a blow wind, like a windy day. Or horse trotting. The same time, play the music. Did you hear the horse trotting? Or I even can imitate the geese trying to talk to each other, especially right now, all the geese come back from south. I love the geese song. Or Chinese people talking, 你好吗?很高兴见到你, which means how are you? Nice to meet you. 很高兴见到您. Did you hear that? Or I can imitate people laughing, ha 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 ha. That's the Chinese people, about 2,000 years old, 4 strings. So you say how the Chinese music made all the sound, what's the music will come from? So I will play a piece called the Dragon Boat. It's a perfect piece to showcase how the Chinese music combining with the sound fact at the same time with the music. In May 5th, in Lunar, Canada, we'll have this festival called the Dragon Boat Festival. So all the boats look like a dragon on the head. Then they will race who can go there first. And also, they have a band together to keep the rhythm together. So you can hear the percussion band in the beginning. You can hear the, in the beginning, you can hear the dong-chang, 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 dong-chang. Then the water behind the boat, like all the bubbles. Then you can hear fireworks. Or in the middle, you can hear some of the melody. Each melody represents the boats come from different village. One from St. Paul, one from Minneapolis, one from Northfield, but every music will be a little different. If I have time, I could play 20 boats, but today I only played 2 boats. So then in the middle part, you can hear the people cheering, 加油, let's go, Minneapolis, you know, it's kind of like a cheering for the people. Then you can hear people screaming, like one person say, 加油. Everybody follow. Then people screaming. Then they're very happy to go home because their team just won the boat race. Here is the dragon boat, Long Chuan. that was an example of how the music together, but we also can play very pretty song too. So it's not always that kind of crazy. So the next piece I'm going to is going to southern China, Sichuan. Everybody probably, if you like spicy food, you know the Sichuan food. And so the Sichuan, this girl who doesn't have a bicycle, who doesn't have a car, only thing she had was a horse. She riding a horse to go to a festival. So you can hear, she was very happy riding a horse. You can hear. So then the more people gathering together, they dance together. In the end, the festival finishes, she ride a horse to go away again. It's from the folk tone from Sichuan, 赶花会, go to festival. Now, since this Chinese Pipa is about 2,000 years old, I will play an ancient piece called The Moonlight Over the Spring River. It's one of the classic Chinese Pipa repertoire. Many people even don't know how many years, could be 1,000 years old. So just pretend you're watching a moonlight by the river, and there's flower, there's kind of a water splash, nice of scenery. And Chinese music always have a describe motion, emotion, or storytelling, or scenery, beauty of scenery. So this piece is kind of like an ancient, quiet piece. If you want to take a nap, it will be a good time. Okay, here is the moonlight over the spring river, 春江花月夜. I know I have to finish by 12. I even don't know what time right now. And anybody let me know how many minutes I have? 5. Okay, so I will do a last piece. It's about my life. It's called The Flying Dragon. I was started music when I was 8. My mom forced me to play the Pipa. But because I grew up during the Cultural Revolution, my mom wanted me to became a professional musician. So at the age of 12, I became a professional musician until now. Last year was my 50th years. Played the Pipa. I had a big concert in all the way. So actually the mayor, St. Paul Mayor Carter, even gave me a Go Home Day on April 3rd, 2022. So I'm very proud to be that. But my mom think I was a flying dragon because of the year I was born. It's the dragon year also in the early morning. So the fortune teller said I will be travel all over the world, but never settled down. But my mom didn't believe it. So then later I realized I was a flying dragon. I am still flying dragon. I left my family at age 12 and travel all over the world. Until now, I'm still travel. And it's very suffering in the beginning when you think about 12 years old without parents to work. So it's a lot of sad, lonely, and also little happiness there because I see people like my music. And because of you, I'm still playing. So thank you so much for being here. So this piece is emotional mixing of my life, sad, lonely, struggle, happiness, all together. Here's The Flying Dragon. It's my own composition. That was my first ever wrote in 1997. I always say, if you like, that would be great. If you don't like, I will work harder. Next time, I hope you'll like it. Here's The Flying Dragon.
Let's have another round of applause for Gao Hong. Beautiful music. And I think there's a selfie is about to take place right here. We can say we were here when that happened. Okay, welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. My name is Tim Hart Anderson. I'm the senior minister here at Westminster Presbyterian Church and located in beautiful downtown Minneapolis on Nicollet Mall. And what a beautiful spring day. We finally got one, about time. And I'm the moderator of the forum. Some of you may have heard that I have announced my coming retirement from Westminster. Next October 31st, I'll be stepping down. And the church will keep going and the forum will keep going with new leadership that will be just terrific. So we need your presence, just like we're saying this to the congregation. Show up, it's good. Today we're pleased to welcome mental health specialist and author Dr. Pooja Lakshmin to the forum. For more than 40 years, the Westminster Town Hall Forum has invited speakers of conscience to address issues of the day from an ethical perspective. This is the third program in our spring series on the theme of what the world can teach us. This season of the forum is co-sponsored by the M.A. Mortensen Company. We thank them and all our individual supporters for helping make these forum programs free and open to all. We invite you to join us for our final program this season on Saturday, May 20th. We will be welcoming Dr. Cornel West to the forum alongside Ifeoma Ike for our third annual Arc Toward Justice Forum. This evening forum, it's a 6 o'clock forum. We'll have music starting at 5:30 by the singers of This Age Youth Choir. And Miss Ifeoma will speak at 6, introducing Dr. West, and we encourage you to be here on May 20th in person. All of these programs, including today, are made possible because of individual supporters, and I know many of you are donors to the forum. Thank you for that. There often is a misperception that Westminster Church somehow funds all this. We fund all this. It's a community-based program, and we are grateful for your support. You might want to become a supporter of the forum. There are, I think, should be envelopes in the material that you received. You're welcome to use those and drop them off on the way out, or go to westminsterforum.org/donate and help us keep these programs going and free and open to all. We also are grateful to Minnesota Public Radio for recording and broadcasting all of our forums. NPR is presenting the Town Hall Forum's Spring Series as a week-long special set of programs. You'll be able to hear all 4 of our spring talks the week of May 22nd. That begins Monday, May 22nd, every day at noon. You can always watch or listen to this program live on the Town Hall Forum website, and I know there are some now live streaming or perhaps through our Facebook page. Thank you for being with us as well. And we're always grateful to our other media co-sponsors, MinnPost, which is a nonprofit community-supported newsroom, a trusted guide to the critical issues facing our state, particularly around immigrants and people of color and those in our community who sometimes are on the receiving end of the cruelties of our systems. Sign up to receive their free coverage, minnpost.com/newsletters. Thanks as well to Sahan Journal. Their mission is to provide reliable, high-quality journalism. Learn more about them at sahanjournal.com. In the second half of today's program, Dr. Lakshmin will be taking questions. This is the Town Hall Forum part of our program, taking questions from you all, the audience. In the sanctuary, you should have a blank question in your program, and use that, if you would, to record a question. We want to hear from you. During the Q&A, we'll ask ushers to collect those and bring them forward. And if you are watching online, we're glad to have you here and want you to participate as well. Write your question into the chat under the video. We have people monitoring that, and we will collect those questions as well as the in-house ones and get to as many of them as we can. For those of you here in person today following our our program, we will have what we're calling continuing the conversation with food and beverage offered in a setting in the recreation room, the rec room, which is just out this door. And I see Matt Skinner and Megan Gage Finn up there. They're going to be there kind of facilitating this conversation to keep the conversation going, because we're not going to get everything covered in our Q&A period. And there'll be some refreshments for you there, and we invite you to that, continuing the conversation. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's Westminster Town Hall Forum speaker. Dr. Pooja Lakshmin is a board-certified physician and psychiatrist, a clinical assistant professor at George Washington University, and a New York Times contributor. Dr. Lakshmin serves on the board of directors for the Maternal Mental Health Leadership Alliance, a national nonprofit dedicated to furthering maternal mental health policy. And she's on the editorial advisory board of Clinical Psychiatry News. She is the founder and CEO of GEMMA, G-E-M-M-A, the first digital education platform dedicated exclusively to women's mental health, centering on inclusion and impact. Dr. Lakshmin is the author of the new book, Real Self-Care, a transformative program for redefining wellness, crystals, cleanses, and bubble baths not included. Please help me in welcoming to the Westminster Town Hall Forum, Dr. Pooja Lakshmin.
Thank you, Tim, for that lovely introduction, and it is such a pleasure to be here this afternoon with all of you. I want to just give a very hearty thank you to the Westminster Town Hall Forum for having me. I'm not intimidated or nervous at all that Cornel West is the next speaker in May. And yeah, thank you to all of you who decided to show up today in person, and for folks that are watching on the live stream too. So our conversation today, I've decided to set it up in 3 acts, kind of riffing off of This American Life. Act 1, I'll tell you some stories about brave women who I've come to know. Act 2, we'll talk about the problem with commodified commercial wellness. And then Act 3 will cover eudaimonic well-being and the topic of my book, Real Self-Care. Like Tim said, we won't get to everything in my prepared remarks, but I'm very excited to dive into QA and continue the conversation over lunch too. So Act 1, 2 stories, 2 women. The first is Sanjana. Sanjana is a woman that I met in 2016 when I was a psychiatry resident at George Washington University. At that time, I was very interested in global mental health, and I was able to secure a very, very small stipend to do a very, very small research project in my family's hometown of Bangalore, India. My parents were both born in Bangalore. And by research standards, this was not a big thing. This was a really small seed. But in terms of my knowledge and my understanding of mental health as a young psychiatrist, it was profoundly impactful. So in this research project, I would be interviewing 8 women who lived in a rural village outside of the city of Bangalore. And for those of you who don't know, Bangalore is sort of like, it's like the Silicon Valley of India. Lots of tech, a very booming city. But this village, about 50 miles outside of the city, was rural. And so Sanjana was a mom of 3 girls, and she was a patient in the community clinic that was run by the research institution in Bangalore. And this clinic treated patients who had depression, anxiety, other mental health conditions. And Sanjana took multiple buses, traveled for a whole day to come to this clinic and get treatment. And I mentioned that she had 3 daughters because in India, having a daughter is worse than having a son, right? There's still huge amounts of discrimination for girls. And when you have a daughter, you have to get them married. And in order to get them married, you have to have enough dowry. Dowry is the money that you pay to the husband's family to help them take care of your daughter when she enters their family. The other piece of information that's helpful to know is that in this clinic and in this community, the average grade or level of education for the women who were patients there was 4th grade. Most of the women had gotten married before they were 20 years old. So quite a few gender disadvantage factors. And that's kind of a fancy word for patriarchy, right? And systems of oppression that we see all over the world. In research, we call that gender disadvantage. So for Sanjana, on one hand, she was quite lucky because she had been allowed to stay in school until she was in 10th grade. So that put her a little bit above the norm. But on the other hand, she had 3 daughters. So that was kind of a bad draw for her. Now, her family worked in the power loom industry. And so power looms are these huge, big, loud machines that are used to make saris, to spin the silk for the saris. Saris are the gorgeous, long pieces of cloth that Indian women wear. And so they worked in the power looms, and she developed migraines, headaches, because the machines were so loud. And so she came to the clinic to get help for her headaches, and also to get help for the fact that she was fatigued and tired all the time. Her muscles were aching everywhere. She never used the word depression, because that's kind of a taboo word to use. But she had all of these other physical complaints. And she was trying to get help, and it was a risk for her. She was really brave, because if anybody in her family found out that she was taking medication or she was talking to a psychiatrist, that would bring a lot of shame onto her, which could then transfer to her daughter's marriage prospects. So it was a bold move for her to decide to get help. So that's Sanjana, and we'll come back to her story at the end. And then there's Michaela. Michaela was a patient in my private practice. She lives in Washington, D.C. She's a professional woman, well-educated. And she originally came to see me for treatment of her obsessive-compulsive disorder, which we got under control with medication, with psychotherapy. And then we turned towards some of the harder questions. What does she want for her life? How does she make time for herself? She had 2 teenage daughters that she was co-parenting with her ex-husband. How does she fit herself in? What really brings her joy? Where does she ascribe meaning? All those types of, easy things to think about. And we were doing pretty well. We were making progress. She had decided to save up some money to take some community art classes. She was somebody who really loved art, and previously, when she was younger, had dabbled in different types of artistic pursuits, and so she was really excited about this. But then catastrophe struck. Her mom unexpectedly passed away, and her father, who was quite ill, needed to move in with her. And when I say needed, I mean that that was what the expectation was in her family structure. So Michaela was a Black woman. She had 2 older brothers, but she, as the only daughter in the family, the strong Black woman, was always the one that was stepping in to take care of everybody else. She was lending folks money. Every Sunday, everybody came over to her house for dinner. She planned all the vacations, right? So when kind of chaos struck, Michaela was the one who was expected to sort of step in. And so she asked her dad to move in with her, and he had mobility issues, so the money that she had saved to spend on herself on these art classes would have to go to doing a renovation in her condo. So we were kind of stuck with this hard decision. Was it possible? How does she actually take care of herself? Can she do something for herself in the context of having to be the one who is responsible for everybody else in her family, for having this duty that she wants to uphold, and for living in this framework where, as a woman, as a daughter, as a girl, it's expected of her to provide for everybody else. So I'm not trying to equate the suffering of a Black professional woman living in Washington, D.C. with the suffering of a woman in India who lives in a rural village. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that no matter what continent you live on, oppression and misogyny makes you feel small, makes you feel like you don't have choices, and that you have to contort yourself to live within and uphold these power structures. So now we'll move on to Act 2. I'm going to take a sip of water. So Act 2, the wellness industry. So if you live in America, the solution to Michaela's problem is to do a juice cleanse. Sign up for a new exercise program, buy a bullet journal, any number of products, services that are sold to you on social media. And that's what we're kind of expected to believe in. And that's where we're supposed to get our salvation, so to speak, as women. The statistic for the global wellness industry's worth in 2020, it was $4.4 trillion. So this is a business, right? This is an entire economic system that has built itself around telling women that the problem lies inside of us and that we can buy our way to the answer, that we can buy our way to feeling better. And the issue with this is that when we turn to commodified wellness, we're placing the burden of change on the individual, and we're completely exonerating the larger social structures that caused the problem in the first place. So we live in a country where 30 million Americans don't have health insurance, where 25% of American workers aren't able to take a paid sick day, where if you're a Black woman in America, you have to work for 19 months to make the same amount of money that a white man will make in 12 months, right? These are huge, powerful forces that are embedded into the entire way our economy and our society was set up. And so when the answer is a bubble bath and a glass of wine, I find that to be condescending at best, but at worst, manipulative, and quite destructive, actually, to the self-worth of my patients. So I come to this message from my lens as a psychiatrist who takes care of patients, so who has patients who come in and say things like, Dr. Lakshmin, I'm stressed out, I'm burnt out, I'm not eating well, I'm not sleeping well, and I feel like it's my fault because I have this meditation app on my phone that I know I'm supposed to be using, but I can't find the time. And the last thing I feel like doing is meditating. So I'm coming here from that lens where in my clinical practice, I'm basically screaming all the time to my patients, like, this isn't your fault. But I'm also coming to this message from a very personal place. And I've found that as I've been on tour for Real Self-Care, that it's really, really critical for me to share my personal story with wellness. The reason that it's so critical is because I'm modeling for all the other women out there that are listening, that are reading, that are here. I'm modeling compassion for myself, and we need to have compassion for each other. So I'm going to share a little bit of my own journey with wellness and the mistakes that I've made and where I went off track. And I ask you to receive it with compassion. And the first bit of this story, the story, to be clear, the story is about me blowing up my life when I was 28 years old. But the caveat, or the footnote, is that I also want to acknowledge that I had the privilege of being able to have an existential crisis because of all of the sacrifices that 2 generations in my family have put forth ahead of me. So we're talking about global mental health today, and we're talking about lessons learned. So I wanted to bring this in. My grandfather came to America in the 1940s for the first time. He was a research professor of pharmacology. He was a scientist, and he came to the States in the 40s to study. And then he came back in the 1960s and was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And he came because he was frustrated with being denied opportunities in India due to the caste system. So he came to America to be able to achieve his goals. And he went on to publish papers in places like Nature, no big deal. When he came in the 60s, he came with my father, who was about 10 at the time, and went on to become an anesthesiologist and marry my mom, who left India when she was just 23. She left her whole family behind and came to this new country. And they built a life which allowed me and my younger sister to graduate from prestigious schools, to not have student loans, for me to go to medical school and not have student loans. That's huge. And so I have so much gratitude for that. And as I tell this story, I want to acknowledge that I'm only here with the lessons that I've learned because of the sacrifices that their generation made for me and my generation as a geriatric millennial to make my own meaning and find my own meaning. So when I was 28, I was a psychiatry resident at a prestigious university in California, and I had done all the things that you were supposed to do as a good Indian girl. I had gone to good schools, I'd become a doctor, I'd gotten married. So I checked all the boxes, and I was finally saying to myself, okay, now I can figure out how to be happy. Like, now I'm allowed to try and be happy. And yeah, of course, long story short, that didn't work. But the reason that it didn't work was because I had constructed my whole life based on society's values, based on my parents' values, which were not bad values. Again, just they weren't mine, right? I didn't know what my values were. And then on top of that, I was working in a medical system, training to become a psychiatrist, and I was really confused. I had all these questions. I didn't understand why somebody who came in with the diagnosis of major depressive disorder was able to get their insurance to pay for their hospital stay. But if somebody had the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, the insurance company wouldn't pay. I was confused by the fact that when somebody came into the ER and they didn't have housing, all I could do was offer Zoloft, right? But I had no tools in my tool belt to help them actually get housing. And I also recognize this is a very naive and privileged way to come to medicine, but that's where I was. I had thought becoming a doctor meant that I would be able to help every single patient who was in front of me with every single one of their problems. And unfortunately, that just was not true. And I was really angry. So I blew it all up. I left my marriage. I moved into a commune in San Francisco, a wellness commune. And pretty soon after that, I dropped out of residency. And I spent 2 years with this group. And this was a group that was very focused on meditation, spirituality, sexuality. I came to find out years later that really it is a cult. And it's hard for me now to even kind of say that word and talk about it, but that's there. And it wasn't all bad. During that time, I got to do some really, really interesting research, learning about the neuroscience of female orgasm and working at a lab, one of only 2 labs in the country that puts people in fMRI machines and looks at the brain. So I got a lot professionally and personally out of this time in my life. But after 2 years, I came to understand that there's just as many hypocrisies and inconsistencies in the wellness world as there are in mainstream medicine. And again, oppression and misogyny, they make you feel small, they make you feel bad. No matter what continent you live on, no matter what system you're in, no matter the label of the Ivy League school, no matter the brand of the law firm that you work for or the wellness group that you're part of, right? These are forces that are embedded in every single aspect of our lives, and you can't run away from them. Because when the solution is commercial, there's no chance for us to get to collective change. But when the solution is personal, then we have a fighting chance of being able to get to change. So now we're at Act 3. And in Act 3, I share with you all a solution. And I say a solution because there's no one solution, right? When you believe that there's only one answer, that's when you get into trouble. So this solution, this is one answer. This is one way to think about it, but there's plenty of ways that you can think about it. So I started thinking more about and reading more about hedonic versus eudaimonic well-being. Hedonic well-being is a type of well-being that's very focused on pleasure. In the hedonic well-being framework, well-being and happiness is equated with feeling good. So in order to feel good, you are moving away from bad feelings, hard decisions, and seeking relief in whether it is, the luxury retreat that you're going on, whether it's the chocolate bar that you're eating, right? It's the escape that has you feel good. That's hedonic well-being. And again, in that framework, you're saying that in order to live a good life, you have to be happy all the time. And we all know that that's obviously not possible. Not only is it not possible, it also means that you're running away from the hard stuff. You're running away from the conflicts, the internal conflicts that you have to resolve to get to a place of meaning and to understand what your priorities are. So that's where we come to eudaimonic well-being. Eudaimonic well-being says that a life centered on meaning and what matters most to you is a well-lived life. And the research shows that people who are able to identify and verbalize their values, what matters most to them, what they derive meaning from, and are then able to take a step further and align their behaviors and their relationships and their activities with that internal meaning, those people generally report more happiness, report that they feel better, do better in terms of physical and mental health. So the problem, or the difficult part with this, is understanding, well, what do I really care about? What really matters for me, right? And as I've shared here today, especially for women, it's so tough because you're constantly fending off all of these other systemic forces and opinions and judgments. So I often find, as I'm teaching about real self-care and talking to my patients or working with people in Gemma, I find that when you ask folks, what are your values? One of two things happens. Either they freeze up or they give you this really canned response. And it's like, well, I value my family. And it's kind of like, okay, great. Like we all value our families. Like that's not helpful. Why do you value your family? How do you value your family, right? What does that actually mean to you? What does that look like when you're embodying that value? A value isn't a noun. It's an adverb or an adjective. So my book, Real Self-Care, is a framework for grappling with these questions of what really matters to me, What do I really value? Because you can't come to it head on. First, you have to do some internal work that allows you to even be able to get to a place where you can ask that question of yourself and get an honest, truthful answer. So I'm gonna share the 4 principles of real self-care. And then in the QA, we can dive a little bit deeper into how to implement these, and I'll answer more questions around the 4 kind of principles. So principle 1 of real self-care, setting boundaries and learning how to deal with guilt. Principle 2 of real self-care, talking to yourself with compassion. Principle 3 of real self-care, this is the hardest one, identifying your values and then actually making decisions aligned with your values. Not your mom's values, not your best friend's values, but your values. And then principle 4, the last one, remembering that this is power. So I want to come back to Sanjana and Michaela as we wrap up. So Sanjana, remember, was the woman in India, in the village outside of Bangalore, who had the 3 daughters, who was brave and worried about coming to get treatment for her depression. A really interesting thing happened once she started getting treatment and feeling better. She started whispering in her family, in her community. She started whispering to others, 1 or 2 people, that she had come to get help, that she was taking medication. And she was waiting to be ostracized, to be shamed, to be kicked out. And instead, the response was, me too. I'm taking medication too. I went to that same clinic. And she was like, wow, oh my gosh. Other women are struggling. Other women are getting help. I'm not a weirdo, right? So she started being more bold with this and open about the fact that calling it depression, saying that she was taking medication, saying that she took a bus 2 buses once a month to come talk to somebody to get help, and that it really helped her. And when young women from the village would come to get advice from her about, their husband that was maybe drinking too much, or maybe their mother-in-law who was mean, Sanjana would, give them advice, but she'd also make sure to mention about this clinic and about how she had gotten help and how it really worked. So that's compassion, that's power, and that's how change really happens. Again, when wellness is commercial, we can never get to collective change. But when wellness is something that is a personal choice, where it's actually about you changing your behavior and how you show up in your community, then we have a chance. And so Michaela, the professional woman from Washington, D.C., who was seeing me for her OCD and whose father had to move in. So we were grappling with, can she take care of herself? What does she do? So Michaela's real self-care was that she ended up taking a leave of absence from her job. And she was open that it was a mental health leave of absence. And during that time, we worked together more closely. She was able to investigate Medicare benefits, which is a terrible thing to have to think about, right? But she was able to get things covered for her dad and really sort through all that. She also was brave enough to confront both of her brothers and ask that they pitch in financially. And when she went back to work, she was bracing for this impact of maybe getting demoted, pushed out, especially as a Black woman in corporate America. She was really worried, and she had reason to be. That wasn't in her head. That was a real worry. But instead, she connected with another colleague who had a son that had OCD. And they started a little kind of informal support group for other folks at her workplace that were navigating taking care of folks with mental health issues in their own family, navigating trying to get benefits, leave, all this stuff. And when she went up for her next performance review, her bosses actually said that she was getting a promotion, and one of the reasons that she was getting the promotion was because they felt like through her advocacy and work inside the organization that she had really shifted the culture, and that it was really important that she had done that. It was valued. So again, compassion, power, agency, right? Shifting her own behavior, taking a risk. Again, these are risks. But this led to a cascade effect within her own organization. So I want to wrap up here and again come back to the fact that for well-being to make a systemic impact, we all have to take responsibility for our own choices and recognize that no matter where you are in your life, no matter what your social constraints are, there's always a path to make a different choice. And I'm not saying that path is easy. No, absolutely not. It's really hard. It took me a decade to get to a place where I felt like I'm living closer to my values. And it's always a work in progress, too. It's never one and done. It's not something that you can just check off the list and say, okay, everything's great. Right now in my life, I'm balancing the fact that I'm on a book tour, I run a practice and see patients, I have a business, Gemma, and I also have a almost one-year-old son who is at home. And as I'm wrapping up, I want to also just give a shout out and a thank you to my own partner, Justin, who is home right now in Austin, Texas, taking care of our son, so that I can be here, chasing my wild dreams and speaking to folks and hopefully educating and imparting some of what I've learned. But that's only possible because he's willing to chip in and not, I shouldn't say chip in, he's willing to do more than 50%. And I want to end with a quote from Audre Lorde. For those of you who don't know Audre Lorde is a Black, queer, feminist thinker who in the 1950s and 60s coined the phrase, self-care is self-preservation. Audre Lorde said, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us, temporarily, to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change." Thank you so much.
Dr. Lakshmin, thank you very much for your remarks. This is a Westminster Town Hall Forum coming to you from downtown Minneapolis. I'm Tim Hart Anderson, Senior Minister at Westminster Presbyterian Church and moderator of the forum. Our speaker today is mental health specialist and author, Dr. Pooja Lakshmin. If you're here in the sanctuary, we invite you to write a question on a card, hold that up for our ushers to collect. If you're watching online, put your questions into the chat, please, and we'll get to as many as we can. While the ushers begin collecting questions, I'd like to thank our co-sponsor for this spring series, M.A. Mortensen Companies. Their support, along with individual donors like you, what makes these free and open programs possible. Thanks to Mortensen Companies and all of you for your support. A reminder that we have one more forum this spring. Please join us for our Arc Toward Justice program on Saturday here at Westminster, Saturday, May 20th, 6 p.m., with Dr. Cornell West and Ifoma Ike. For more information about that program or to watch or listen to past forums, visit our website, westminsterforum.org. For those of you here in person, Dr. Lakshmin will be signing copies of her book immediately following the forum right outside these doors. Copies are for sale from Next Chapter Books. If you plan to purchase a book, and you should, I've read it, it's a fascinating read, please do so immediately after the forum. They tend to sell out quickly. We'll also have a free breads and spreads reception following the program in Westminster Hall, which is our tradition at the forum. And for those interested, we will have facilitated small group conversation, continuing the conversation about today's program immediately following the forum in the rec room. And now, Dr. Lakshmin, if you're ready, I'll present the questions from the audience. In your book, you refer to the self-care industrial complex, and you speak of the tyranny of self-care. Can you describe what you're referring to when you talk like that about self-care?
Yeah, the tyranny of self-care is a term that I started using a couple years ago to describe that very frequent story that I heard in my practice of the woman who comes in and says, I'm stressed out, I'm burnt out, I'm not eating well, I'm not sleeping well, and I feel like it's my fault because I don't go to yoga, I don't meditate, I don't do any of that stuff that all the experts are telling me that I'm supposed to do to feel better. And I realized that the prescribed solutions that were coming from the outside, they don't work because they're another thing on the to-do list. And especially for women, especially for marginalized groups, especially, I'll say for myself and most of my patients who are in that age range where maybe you have young kids that you're taking care of, you're trying to balance a career, maybe you're taking care of your elderly parents as well. There's no time. There's just no time. And so when the solution is another thing to do, that's where it feels like a burden. That's why it's called the tyranny, right? Because it's just another thing on the list. And then you feel bad because you don't have time to get to it. And if you do get to it, then you feel guilty that you're not doing something else. Here's another perfect example. And this ties into kind of the self-care industrial complex, right? When you finally work up the courage to take a half day off from work and say, okay, I'm gonna drop $200 and get a massage, right? I'm gonna really do this for myself. And then you spend the whole time on the massage table worried about the to-do list. And then you're wondering, like, gosh, I think there's only like 20 minutes left. I've wasted this. I just spent $200. You leave kind of feeling a little bit worse than when you got into the massage. And then you come back to your desk and you have 100 emails that you're supposed to get to that you feel like you have to catch up for all of the productivity. Again, what I'm pointing to here is when the solution is about the individual, right? And the way that they're supposed to solve this problem and yet still meet all of the demands on their time, whether that is as a parent, whether that's as an employee, whether that is as an entrepreneur and a business owner, right? No matter the context, right? It's still sort of like the same map that we find ourselves in.
In your book, you quote Jessica Calarco, and you know which quote I'm heading toward. Other societies have social safety networks. The U.S. has women. I hear a lot of laughter in the room. Can you describe, you understand that, huh? Could you describe what she was getting at there?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes, and it came from Anne Helen Peterson's Substack, Culture Study, which is one of my favorite reads. And Jessica Calarco is a sociologist whose work is incredible. So if you don't know her, definitely Google her, look up, she's written a couple books. So I'll share a statistic that gets to the heart of that quote. In Sweden, they did a research study where they offered new dads 1 month of flexible paid parental leave that new dads could take at any time they wanted. It didn't have to be the full month. They could apply it, for the doctor's visits, the pediatrician appointments, they could use it however they wanted. And when they offered that 30 days of paid flexible paternity leave, the number of anti-anxiety prescriptions for moms went down by 26%. And I'm not sharing this to demonize psychiatric medications. I'm a psychiatrist. I prescribe Zoloft all the time, and I actually take Zoloft myself. So I'm not saying that medication isn't useful and needed. Of course it is, because depression is real and it's a neurobiologic condition. And when we support families, when we actually invest as a country if we were to invest as a country in social services, things like federally mandated paid parental leave, like affordable, universal, accessible childcare, women feel better. They do better. And there are plenty of case examples all over the world where that does happen. And in America, because of a number of issues that past forum speakers understand much better than I do, that has never been the case, right? Because we have this individualistic, pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality that views that collective support, that community support, as something to be ashamed of, or something that is a privilege, or that you should you should earn enough individual wealth that you can make that happen, but we shouldn't offer that for everybody. And instead, like Jessica said, we just have mothers that are picking up the slack.
I know in overseas development work, certainly that we do through the church, we often focus on assisting women, because when women do well, the world does well. What's standing in the way of that approach to life together here in the U.S.? In a nutshell.
That's a big question. So I'm a psychiatrist that specializes in women's mental health, and the technical term for my training and what I do is perinatal psychiatrist. So I focus in this pregnancy, postpartum period. And what I've come to understand is that women's mental health, maternal mental health, is a social justice issue. Because, thank you. Just take the small statistic and fact that when a new mom is able to get 4 to 6 consecutive hours of sleep in the postpartum period, she has less risk of developing postpartum depression. That's real. That's science. But how do you get 4 to 6 hours of consecutive sleep, right? Do you have a partner that can help you? Do you have grandparents that are available for help in that postpartum period? What are your feeding choices? Do you feel like you have to breastfeed, or do you think that you can actually supplement with formula, right? The ability to make that choice is totally impacted by social determinants of health. So I am getting to your question, Tim. But when I first started writing Real Self-Care, I was coming to this from, I guess you could say, a feminist lens. And one of the things that I learned during this period of time, because I started writing in 2018, and so I was writing during the pandemic. I was writing as I was going through IVF to get pregnant, and I was writing through George Floyd and everything that was happening in the world. And I have come to understand that my message for Real Self-Care, the feminist message, must be intersectional too. Because this isn't just about capitalism, it's also about white supremacy. It's about the fact that the entire American economy was built on a slavery model, right? Where you're extracting productivity from a group of people who are lower in the caste system. I mentioned caste in my remarks, and that was on purpose. So I'm coming to understand, and I will say I'm kind of remedial here. I looked to my colleagues who are much more skilled in talking about these things to understand how it all comes together for women's mental health. But I strongly believe that it does. And I think when we keep women's mental health siloed in the gender space, it's actually a disadvantage for us. We need to be talking about race. We need to be talking about identity. We need to be talking about men, right? We need to be talking about all of that in the same conversation. And I think that's how we move towards change. But I unfortunately don't have a solution for how that happens. And that's why I will never run for office.
You're wanting to move the conversation to an internal place as opposed to all these external realities that oppress women particularly. Yes. Yes. Okay, I got it. One of our questioners says, for people who can't outrun their stress, and I guess there are a few of us here who feel that way, and have such a full plate, what do you recommend as the first step? Like if even setting boundaries seems impossible?
Yes, thank you for this question. It's an important one that I've come to understand as I've been talking about real self-care, because so many of the folks that are reading this book are drowning in the stress and the demands. There's actually there's a quiz in the book that's called the Real Self-Care Thermometer that you can take and answer the questions. It was very fun for me to write. It was kind of like those old-time Cosmo quizzes where you answer the questions. And there's 3 levels. There's red, yellow, and green. Red is bad, green is good. Most people that read the book are probably going to fall in the red and yellow. And I will say I haven't taken the quiz since the book has come out, and I imagine that I probably am in the yellow right now, so full disclosure. If you're in the red or yellow, and you're in that burnout place, that place where every decision feels so hard, then you have to start with boundaries. The only place to start is boundaries. And I know everybody talks about boundaries. We hear boundaries all the time. You know, every therapist on Instagram is talking about boundaries. The reason that everybody's talking about it is because it's hard to do. My framework for boundaries is a little bit different. So when I first came on the faculty at George Washington University, my mentor took me out for lunch. This was in 2016. And she gave me a piece of advice. She said, Pooja, you don't need to answer your phone. You can let it go to voicemail, listen to what they say, and then decide. So sometimes it's the front desk, and they just had like insurance paperwork that they needed me to fill out, and I could say, okay, let me finish what I'm doing, and I'll come at the end of the day. Sometimes it's a patient who I know if she even goes one day without her stimulant medication, her ADHD is going to be so bad that she could lose her job. Okay, let me right away put that refill in, right? I get to decide. So my boundary is in the pause. It's the pause that is the boundary. And then you can say yes, you can say no, or you can negotiate. A boundary isn't always no, right? It's not a brick wall. That's not a healthy boundary. A healthy boundary is like one of those trampoline nets. It's flexible. And depending on your skin color, depending on your gender identity, depending on how much money you have, no is not always available. No always comes with a cost, for sure, whether that's a financial cost or emotional cost. But the pause is always available. And maybe you can't say no right now to what that is, to the request, but maybe you can say for yourself, okay, my goal is a year from now, I want to be in a place where no is possible, right? So what do I have to do now to start constructing my life and problem solving so that no is available to me a year from now?
A follow-up question from one of our listeners. So I'm trying to set boundaries. I'm asking for help. No one is stepping up to help. The consequences are real for loved ones. What do you recommend?
Yes. So I would have a couple follow-up questions, which whoever asked this, you can't answer right now, but this is what I would think about. How are you asking for help? Are you really asking? Or are you asking in a way that is angry or stressed out? Are you asking in a way that pushes people further? Or are you asking in a way that actually allows the person who's on the other side to say yes? Are you able to receive help, like actually receive it? And in Real Self-Care, I talk about how as women, we've been conditioned to believe that doing everything ourselves is a badge of honor. And we don't have practice receiving help, receiving support. Usually, motherhood is the first time for many of my patients in their life where you really can't do it alone. You have to be able to lean on others. And so for folks who have trouble with that, or if you don't have an active community, right? If you don't have a church, right? If you don't have a group of friends, you have to start somewhere. You have to learn to practice. So one takeaway or suggestion would be start asking for help in low stakes situations, like when you don't even actually need it, but just as practice, and see what it feels like. So then you won't be so frustrated when you actually do need it and the person says no. So it's like you're learning this skill and learning how to regulate your own emotions when you're doing the asking.
In your book, you had a startling statistic. Much of what you're working with and talking about today and writing about has to do with younger women and the pressures in that stage of life. But you also said that it gets harder for women in some ways. You said a study shows that 1 in 4 women in the U.S. over 60 are being treated for depression. I think that was the stat. And we have a few women in that age range here. Tell us what you would, how you would advise a person in such a situation.
Oh, it's a hard questions today. I think what you're talking about, Tim, is we're getting to this question of the line between a mental health condition, like depression, which is real, again, like we talked about that. It's good to get treatment for depression. And there are social forces that contribute to the fact that the rates of depression in women are double the rates of depression in men, cis hetero men. So, well, a lot of the work that I do with my patients is, like, these are folks who are very high functioning. You know, it's like doctors, lawyers, professionals that struggle with either depression or anxiety and are taking medication, and we're doing therapy. And the work is sort of sorting through, when is it my depression, and is my depression under control? And then what are the choices that I can make in my own life that help my mental health, right? That don't make it worse. And that's not, so wellness or a self-help book is never treatment for depression, right? In Real Self-Care, I have little bullets about like when to seek professional psychiatric help. So there's a way where the solution has to be complementary, right? And medication can be one piece of that. Exercise can be one piece of that. Talking to somebody, whether that's a therapist or a pastor or a support group, can be one piece of that. And then doing this work of real self-care with the boundaries and compassion and values, that's another piece of that. But no one thing alone solves everything.
Here's a question that does not come from me, but it's pertinent. Can you talk about mental health and the transition from professional life to retirement? I'm listening.
This is a great question. So my psychoanalyst, my therapist, is retiring in December of this year, and I've been seeing her for seven years, multiple times a week. And so this question makes me think of that. I think obviously I'm coming from a different perspective as a 39-year-old who's kind of in a different stage, but I see it as, like any life transition, there's grief, there's aspects that you're grieving, and then there are aspects and experiences that you're looking forward to that feel expansive, right? That feel like new beginnings. And I think for most folks in that transition space, there is a mix of that grief and that excitement. And they both go together, right? They're intertwined. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we try and make it black and white, like pretend that there's not grief around it, right? Allowing yourself to feel the grief of like the season that is closing is really important. And one of the ways to work with that grief, and when I say grief, like little g grief, right, is in rituals, in making meaning, right? How do you want to end out this chapter? What is the symbolism? What looking back 10 years from now, how did I want to show up, right? What can I do to demarcate this for myself and make it mean something? And then I think that the excitement side, the creative, expansive side, depending on your personality, everybody has a different way of coming to that. For some folks, it's going to be, I'm going to pour myself in lots of different activities. I'm going to have lots of structure. I need that, right? For other folks, what's going to feel better is having lots of open space and open time and just seeing what comes up. So I don't think there's like one individual prescription or solution. It's more about allowing yourself to be with both of those kind of contradictory emotional states.
Thank you. That was helpful. Appreciate it. Let me ask you about the role of religion and ritual. You come from a Hindu background yourself. Is religion perpetuating the self-care tyranny, or is it helpful, or is it a mixed bag?
Yeah. I think that in my demographic, we have, wellness has become sort of cult-like and religious-like, especially when we're looking at social media and through the pandemic, how people have lost so much as it comes to social life and community ties. We see kind of a longing for not only finding answers to the normal problems of daily life, but also a longing to have these people, these experts, these celebrities, these influencers in our lives handing down sort of the answer or the solution. I think that in terms of ritual, I think when I think about rituals, the first thing that comes to my mind is meaning, right? A ritual is about the meaning that you make of it. And that is so important, right? There's no prescription for the correct ritual. It's more about the internal language that you use to describe to yourself why it's important to you. And right now we live in a world that is so externally focused. And I will say personally, myself, I've struggled with this on the book launch, like how to balance sort of, me being a human, a person who's nervous and performing in a new way and doing new things, while also being, on social media, having to do this media stuff, right? And so there's always this kind of contradiction, and so I think ritual and symbolism and meaning is a way to find footing in that. I don't have a clear answer for you, though, Tim, about religion. I think that's something that I still is a question mark for me. I was raised Hindu, and spent a lot of time in Hindu temples and had a lot of Hindu rituals applied to me as a child. And I really enjoyed the community and the space that temples provided, but I've moved away from that now, and I haven't found kind of a replacement. And I think a lot of people, at least in terms of in my generation, have similar feelings of missing some aspect of that, but not quite knowing exactly what the new thing is. And I think that's where community comes in. That's where having real community, authentic community that's healthy, I think can fill some of that role.
Last question, about 30 seconds you have here. With the enormous trauma we've all been through, a variety of layers of it, and the mental health crisis we know is around, are you hopeful, optimistic? And you drew a difference between those two words. Can you describe quickly how you're feeling about the world in terms of mental health?
Yeah. So I'm hopeful, not optimistic. Hopeful meaning that I recognize that there's so many problems, there's so many obstacles to getting to change. I'm not glass half full. I'm more like, I know that this is really hard, but I wouldn't be here I wouldn't have written this book. I wouldn't have founded Gemma. I wouldn't have done the work that I'm doing and come back to psychiatry if I didn't really believe that it's up to us to fix it. It really is up to us. And to me, that's a hopeful message.
Good. Thank you, Pooja Lakshmin. Got to stay there for the selfie, all right? Thank you all for being here. Breads and Spreads in Westminster Hall, continuing the conversation in the rec room. We'll see you on May 20th, Cornell West.